I could be writing and spend 8 hours on one sentence. Some days, that's part of the process. And maybe your brain just is like, I am not going to stop until I get this right.
Anthony, on your website, you have a quote: "When you stare into the abyss stares back at you."
My wife wrote that quote.
It's a great quote. What is this abyss?
It was definitely about writing. It's that process of, she took there's that picture of me, and that was on Last Shift, when I'm kind of staring over this script and looking into it. And I think that happens in two places. It happens when you're about to write something, when you're page one of that screenplay is that first step. You're staring into that black hole on that white page, and it can be anything. And then I think it happens again when you're about to shoot the movie, and you're looking at that first page, and you're about to turn this into a living, breathing entity. You're like, what will that become? What's going to climb out of the abyss is kind of where it comes from. Because something's coming out of there. It's going to be good or bad, but something's coming out of it.
Why do you write out of order?
I think it's a process of the note taking, that there are scenes that will pop in your head that are fully fleshed out. And it's also, it stops procrastination, which is a big part of writing. Anything that can, because I could be writing and spend 8 hours on one sentence. Some days, that's part of the process. And maybe your brain just is like, I am not going to stop until I get this right. And I think jumping out of order allows you to get beyond that. When you're like, okay, I'm stuck here. Let's just agree I'm stuck. Tell your mind, I don't know what's going to happen next, but I know what's going to happen in that other scene. So I'm going to recalibrate and go write that scene. I think that's a good way to get something done. I think the goal, this isn't part of the question, but I think a good thing to do is when it's about that getting over procrastination, is when you sit down to write, make a calendar. Make a calendar and make a deadline for yourself. If you, it's almost mystical in a way that if you write without a deadline, you'll write forever. But I say it's mystical because it surprises me when it works. If I have a screenplay I'm going to write, I'm going to be like, all right, I want to be done with this in 30 days. And I write it down in a calendar and I say, okay, I'm going to do page 1 through 6, day 1, page 7 through 12, day 2. And I put it all on the calendar all the way to page 120, and I'll get there. And I think it's almost like you're telling your brain, I only have this long. And you may have some bad days along the way. You're like, oh, I only got 2 pages done. But you'll find times to make it up if you stick to that schedule.
Have you always been that disciplined?
No, not at all.
But with writing, you are?
That's years of kind of like figuring out the craft of how I work, right? And to duel yourself. You have to find all your flaws. You have to find what you consider your weaknesses, and you have to find ways to combat them. I'm a Gemini too, so it's a dueling battle with both sides. But I think I have to let my discipline side win out.
But then you're ambidextrous and you can do many things.
Yes.
If we follow the charts.
Yeah.
Then you can be up here, but then also be doing something here, and yeah.
I think maybe being a Gemini is part of it. I feel one of my strongest suits as a filmmaker is that I can wear different hats completely independently of the process. I started as a producer. I started as an executive with Clive. I was developing projects with writers and directors. And then after being with him, he always knew I wanted to direct. I always wanted to direct, but I fell into that, and I'd never thought about producing. Learning all those skills as a producer probably helped in this process. But when I'm writing, I'm writing. And then when I'm directing, I throw the script out. It's like as if I hadn't written a page of it. I become someone else. So as a director, there's nothing in that script that's important to me if it's not important for the story at the given moment with the actors I have right then and there. And I think that's been very, very helpful in the filmmaking process. And the same goes for when I finish directing and start editing. If I am editing the picture, it's like, well, who cares? I don't care who directed that movie. Now I'm crafting the movie. I'm wearing a completely different hat, and I can you gotta let go of all that baggage along the way of like, well, that scene was really hard to shoot. It has to go in the movie, and I'm like, no, I don't care. I don't care. It depends on what's going to make the movie the best it can be at that stage.
Do you ever find you spread yourself too thin?
I don't know. I don't feel like I do, because I think it's very, in my mind, it's very segmented. I think it's usually in pre-production. Like, you always wish you had more time, because if you're the writer and you're directing, you have a bunch of work to do in prep as a director. But if you're also doing rewrites on the script, then you are splitting your time, and probably spreading myself too thin. I could be rehearsing, but I have to, we had a location change or we lost a location, so I have to write instead. So that is definitely an example of that.
If you are interested in storytelling, you may also like our new book, Story Questions, the sponsor of today's video. It's a story tool that offers you over 1,500 story questions that you can use as story prompts. It's packed with over 40 categories, so whether you are in the brainstorming stages, developing characters, dialogue, or rewriting, it can help you at every stage of the writing process. Think about this statement. Most powerful stories are just great answers to strong questions. We've linked up to story questions in the information section below. Now back to the interview. How do you name your characters?
Oh man, I hate naming characters. I really do. I'm not a fan of, two things I know I'm not good at: character names and titles. And that's not always consistently, because sometimes the name will pop in my head out of nowhere. It's like fully formed. And I'll write it down. And I'll collect names over the years. And then when I'm starting a script, I'll usually be like, oh, let me see, like, I had a cool name. Let me go see if I like this and see if it fits for the character. So I think that's one thing too, like, take notes again. Because and at least for me, just completely randomly, a name will pop in my head that has a clever enunciation or a first and last name that sound good together. I think I did a historical fiction screenplay, and it was one of those movies where you want these characters to stand out, and you're combining names that are both historical but futuristic. And in that process, I think it's really good to do research, right? I'll do this too, and I'm kind of a stickler for, if I know how old my character is, if I know where they are born, I'll go look up statistically what were popular names in that area at that time. And that's often how I come up with names, in a very kind of pragmatic way. And maybe just to create a sense of authenticity.
Right, because in the Northeast, it'd be much different than maybe some part of Colorado or something. And,
Yeah.
And also too, now there's more genderless names.
Yeah.
And let's say in the 80s, everybody had, Jen, Tiffany.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely a time period for names.
Because I've read scripts where people are too creative with names, where every other character has this unique name, and you're like, why? Why? Nobody has that. Because sometimes, you can get as realistic as having two characters with the same name. That's tough, but it's completely, how many Daves do you know, right? You may have a friend group with, we had 4 people on Malum who were named Eric, And it's like, that's just how the cookie crumbles sometimes.